I would like to introduce each of our people. Annabella Bastida, where are you, Annabella? Would you wave to everybody? Is the Executive Director of the Council of Mexican Federations, COFEM. She is focused on issues such as immigrant integration, educating and informing immigrants about their rights, and advocating for increased benefits for all immigrants. Through her initiatives, Bastida has successfully mobilized her membership to demand comprehensive immigration reform and the protection of civil rights. Mark Lopez, the Executive Director, I think some of you may know Mark Lopez, is the Executive Director for the East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice Organization, comes from a family with a long history of activism. He engaged in a wide array of activities at UC Santa Cruz, where he earned his BA in Environmental Studies, and has taught at UC Santa Cruz, Cal State Northridge, and UCLA Extension. Earned his MA from the Chicano Studies Department at a Cal State Northridge, woo-woo, where he completed his master's thesis, The Fire Decolonizing Environmental Justice, which sounds actually like a very interesting topic. Nadia Diaz Foon, where are you, Nadia?
Fun.
Sorry, I'm terribly
Like
sorry.
a good time.
Yes, a good time, okay.
I own it.
Okay, is the Executive Director at the Alliance for a Better Community, ABC, where she works to serve families and their educational needs. She has served the Los Angeles Unified School District in a wide range of leadership positions for 5 years. Victor Dominguez is the Executive Vice President and Chief Mission Advancement Officer for the YMCA of Metropolitan Los Angeles, a nonprofit organization dedicated to strengthening the foundations of community through youth development, healthy living, and social responsibility. Previously, he was Executive Director of the Weingart East Los Angeles Southeast Rio Vista YMCA. Welcome, Victor. Juan Benitez. Dr. Benitez is the Executive Director for the Center for Community Engagement and an Associate Professor in the Department of Chicano and Latino Studies at Cal State Long Beach. Most of you know about this very distinguished center. Engages the university and community in creating a just and civil society where every member functions as an agent of social change. And I believe you have a number of your folks here today.
I wouldn't say they're my folks, Rafe, but we do have a number of community members that we work with in 8 cities and communities in the region.
Those of you who came here as a result of your contact with Dr. Benitez, will you just let us know? Welcome. We're very happy to have you here.
Now they're not going to stand up or acknowledge any of that, Rafe. So
okay, we won't be. Okay, thank you for that warning. He heads university-wide community engagement projects with a wide variety and has certainly come to all of our attention for the excellent work that they do. I wanted to first give each person on the panel just a free opportunity to just react to what they heard, just for a couple of minutes, and then we'll follow up in conversation. So I think, Mark, let's start with you. When you were listening to Chris's presentation, what was going through your mind? And I've told them they don't have to be, they could be respectful, they could be disrespectful, they could be nice, they could be not nice, they just have to be themselves.
Cool. I appreciate the invitation to come share with y'all perspectives that sometimes aren't, I don't know, the most politically friendly perspectives. I think hearing the presentation, honestly, there was a lot of stuff that if you live in the area, you already know. You already know that that there's not enough housing and there's too many folks living in the area for the housing stock that exists, and you know that there's some downward trends in some industries, some traditional industries, but there's obviously still a really large economy, especially in the Commerce area and Vernon and Bow, where there's they're job dense areas, right? I think some of the things that concerned me, my initial thoughts were, we're not a frontier, right? Our communities are not a frontier that others can speculate in, right? These are our communities. And we can either build these communities together or we're going to fight for our communities. And so for a lot of us, we've worked really hard to make sure that our communities are not places that young folks feel like they have to leave, that they're places that we know, even if we go away to school, we're coming back to build these communities. And so we do a lot of youth work, and traditionally I've done a lot of youth work, and I was organized as a young person by my family without a choice, I guess, right? And it was really about developing civic engagement as a lifestyle, right? It's not a career path, it's a lifestyle. Regardless of what your career path is, civic engagement is something that you're responsible for. And I think the Southeast is an area where there's a lot of tradition of having to do with that. It hasn't necessarily been in traditional avenues. It's been a lot of do-it-yourself, DIY, a fuerza, because there is no structures. And so I think I welcome the opportunity to help continue to build those structures and support the existing communities that are the Southeast, to ensure that, again, as we look towards the future, we're looking at retaining residents, not necessarily displacing residents, right? And I think when we look at mega projects in our communities, the 710, the Alameda Corridor, the Lower LA River Revitalization, I see these as opportunities, right? I heard the Alameda Corridor, which has actually been underutilized, right? A lot of people call it a failure because it's underutilized. We could move that towards electrification. 710 corridor, we're looking at wanting to electrify a truck corridor so it's zero emissions. Those are things that don't exist anywhere in the world. They would be the first to exist here in our communities. And when you look at that, we're not just looking at reducing air pollution, which of course is a huge issue. We look at this as this is the future of the world, and the future of the world can start in our communities. We're not behind, we're on the edge of being the future for everyone else. So if we build that here, and when I say build, I don't mean let's just see it physically here, but actually build the infrastructure of the economy here in those empty warehouses, not just to ship goods for Walmart, but to actually have manufacturing in our communities. Then we get folks that are at the manufacturing level, to the research and development level, to on and on and on can exist here in our communities. And so I think those would be good union jobs, obviously, in an industry that is the future. And so I think that's how I'm interested in that conversation for our communities.
Thank you. Nadia, what about you? Thank you. Your thoughts, Nadia.
My thoughts, lots of thoughts. I want to first thank you for inviting ABC to be part of this important panel and this beginning discussion. I think there were a couple of things that Mark said that really resonated with me, and that I definitely felt while I was listening to the findings, and it was really about the young people in this community, and the civic engagement, and retaining the talent and the young people that come from the Southeast, and making sure that they're part of this of the future, and building this vision that we all want for the region. And I think at the base and the heart of that really has to do with education, and that's not something that I really heard a ton of in the findings. And talking about a couple of different things. Access and quality of the education here in the Southeast area. And when I think about access, I think about, and this was talked about earlier as well, on how the resources go to East LA or they go to South LA. They don't necessarily come here as a region. And one of the big questions is, or one of the big programs that are happening right now in East LA is the Go East LA, where it's a promise program, right? You have kids how many miles down the road that are getting, are having spots promised to them, as they should be, in our Cal State and Cal State programs, and Cal State, so specifically Cal State LA. And it just begs the question, where's the promise? Where's Southeast's promise, right? And that happens because of partnerships and collaborations, and quite frankly, organizing and demanding that those promises come. And so I think that this is an important opportunity to start coordinating around something like that, because access to our Cal State system is going to be really, really important in making anything that we talk about a reality. But it's also about quality. The Cal State system also has a new tool. Has anyone heard of it, or how many folks have really kind of checked it out? It's the high school, it's the graduation initiative. I had to write this down. Hold on one second. You can help me out if you want.
I don't know the full
And
title
it has
of it.
the high school dashboard.
Right.
Has anyone seen it? Can I just get a show of hands, because I don't want to, just a couple of folks. Okay, so I'm just going to take 30
ahead.
seconds to describe it. It's this really powerful tool that connects how well students in the Cal States are doing based on what high school they came from, right? Some really important and powerful data points. So this morning, it wasn't scientific, I'm not an academic. I just did use this tool to do just some quick math on the 8 biggest high schools in this region: Bell Gardens, Maywood Academy, Huntington Park, the 2 Marquez schools, Southgate, and Southeast Los Angeles, right, that primarily serve the bulk of the students in this area. And of the students from this area, from these schools that go to the Cal State system, 75% of them enter not proficient in math and not proficient in English. 75%. That means only 2.5 students out of every 10 that this community is sending out of LAUSD schools do not have to undergo remediation in math and English. That is an outrage. That is criminal. And this is something that we need to really organize around. Only 45% are graduating from the CSU system within 6 years. That means 55% or more are taking longer than that, more than half a decade to graduate or not graduating at all. And so I think that if we're serious about this renaissance, it's got to begin, and it's got to be incredibly inclusive and comprehensive, and we've got to ask ourselves those tough questions on what are the schools, regardless of how they're run and how they're governed, that are serving our children best and helping them to succeed in college and beyond.
Thank you for your participation. Many of you are great friends, great allies, and I feel so extremely happy, excited, and I feel so empowered to participate today. And I would like to give you a round of applause for all their commitment and all the work that you do. Well, as I just can say that this session has been so empowering for me. As I was listening the report as well, some of the remarks of the speaker Rendon, some of the remarks of Efrain Escobedo, and I was reflecting. I was reflecting what he mentioned, that his parents came to this country looking for better opportunities, and similar to what many of us came to this country looking for better opportunities. The story of many of us, and as I was listening to the report, I was thinking on the assets. I was thinking on the assets of this great region. I was thinking how we as an immigrant came to this place looking for better opportunities, for prosperity, and how we feel grateful and we feel appreciative for the opportunity to live in these cities. I have been living most of the years that I have been in the United States, particularly in Compton, and also have most of my relatives and friends living in Linwood, Southgate, and other areas. Working with my organization, which is not working, is a passion. It's a passion that has been allowing me to really work for my community, for the community that I serve. One of the things that just resonate with me is the fact about education, something that we already know and something that is really in my heart. As I mentioned, I have been living in Compton for many years. I have my property, and there are some challenges, but as well many opportunities. For instance, last week someone was shot in front of my house. This happened within the 2 years, 2 murders just in front of my house. Many people said, why you don't leave? Why are you exposing yourself to that danger and that kind of violence? And I said, you know what? I'm not living from this. This is the area where I live. This is the place where I want to live. And our responsibility is to find those solutions to bring more prosperity, to work in collaboration, and making sure that we make our cities, our Southeast cities, really cities that can allow us a better future for our kids. As I mentioned, I feel so grateful for the opportunity of living in these great cities. And as I saw my daughter who graduated from UCLA and now she's doing great, I was telling her the responsibility that we have in our cities, the responsibility that we have to live our kids, our communities. And I think that we can only do this through our civic participation. Our passion is to work and to making sure that we understand the power of civic participation. We sometimes think that civic participation is just voting, but I can say that civic participation is more than just voting. Some people may not be able to vote, but we need to understand that there is power. There is power within our communities, within ourselves, to mobilize and to organize. I hear some comments about how can we make sure that we have more housing, we have more development, but I think that as someone mentioned, the fact is that really need to work in one front where we all can make sure that we are here, that our voices are here, that we organize, and that we advocate for better opportunities for our kids. And I really believe that the progress is within ourselves. As I was listening to the report, I feel so empowered. I feel so empowered because there are many opportunities. There are great assets in our community. First, I wanted to start with the people, with the wonderful people that live in this area, and as well with all the great things that are happening. I feel so grateful, and I feel so honored that many people is putting our eyes in our cities, that particularly they are committed to invest, that they are committed to work hand with hand, and we don't need someone that just come and tell us what to do. I think that we have the power within ourselves to make positive changes and to really make of these cities a great place for all of us to live.
Thank you. Victor.
I, too, would like to thank the Pat Brown Institute for your leadership and vision and not only the work that you're doing here today, but also in the future for the Southeast. And also, I want to really acknowledge and recognize Efrain and the California Community Foundation. Many of you in this room know Efrain, and you know how passionate he is. And you know how passionate he is to ensure the fact that everyone has access and opportunity for whatever they ever imagine. And so when Efrain mentioned this particular project, I knew that he was going to make today happen by bringing together government, business, community, not-for-profit organization in one room to start a conversation of how we can empower each other in ensuring that the Southeast region, one, we have an identity, two, we understand what our plan will be so that not only us in this room will be positively impacted, but everyone in our community understands what they have access to and how they can empower others. And so, Efrain, thank you so very much for the start of today and for the future of the Southeast region. So, Efrain, one more hand for him. So, with that said, looking at the data, how many folks in the room already knew what was going on in the Southeast with that data? So a good number. So I think today, really, the data reaffirms the importance of all of us being able, as a collective force, to work together. And really looking at, even, we may come from different cities, we may come from different viewpoints, but the importance as a collective force of the work that we could accomplish together. And someone mentioned about community input. I just want to also reinforce the fact that this is the first conversation. I honestly believe in my heart that the community input is going to be the most critical to the future success and the transformation of the Southeast region. Having a space like this to have a discussion, about a couple years ago, we wouldn't imagine today happening. It's a reality. and there's so many great work that is happening, and it's being done in silos. We truly need to understand the data. We truly need to understand the work that's happening, and to be able to not only eliminate the differences or the gaps that we may face, but really look at how we build bridges and we come together. So allow today to be the start of the conversation. And I know we have many questions here, so I'll keep my comments very brief.
Good, thank you. Juan?
You had a lot of stuff written down there, Victor. That was all you had.
Oh, wait, I forgot. Dr. Juan, I'm supposed to acknowledge the great work you're doing.
That was on Dr. Benitez's sheet, not on Victor's sheet, by the way.
So, big hashtag thumbs up to Pat Brown Institute and CCF, echoing my colegas here. I think two things stood out for me, Rafe, and I'm going to sort of take a step back and give more of a bird's eye view on the data that was shared and the context in which it was shared here today. The first, to me, has to do more about this asset-based approach. You know, we heard the term and the phrase opportunities, all right, mentioned throughout the presentation and in the context of the comments here. And I'll speak a little bit more on that, but that's the kind of the one thing that stood out, this asset-based approach and what is meant by opportunities and opportunities for who, right? And how decisions are made based on those opportunities really does reflect who perceives these things as opportunities. The second, to me, is this idea of a regional approach. It's interesting because many of you, when you were asking your questions, you introduced yourself by place, name. No one introduced themselves as, hey, I'm from SELA, right, or I'm from Southeast LA. It's seldom that we hear that unless it's in this very intellectual context. So I want to talk about those two things very briefly, and then I think it's important to hear from you all. So to me, the concept or the notion of an opportunity, really it makes sense to direct these comments to our elected officials here. We have mayors, we have former mayors, and how decisions are made based on these opportunities and on behalf of which communities. We have a lot of communities here these decisions are made. And the value I think that the colegas here have shared is around community, but really community, it's entre comillas, right? In quotes, who do we mean by community members? And for the purposes of this discussion, I think it's important to affirm that decisions are made through policy, right? Decisions are made in the abstract here, and processes shape policy. So the data that was presented here today, and I love the way Beacon introduced it as, trends. We're looking at trends here, not snapshots. Those trends don't occur in a vacuum, folks. These trends are shaped by policy and have policy implications. So whether we talk about education, housing, transportation, the environment, there are policy implications to this. So the involvement that we talk about, the community input that we talk about, there is a difference between doing community outreach, which is telling folks, come to our event, come to our city council meetings, come to our school board meetings. Community input, which is, here's what we've decided, give us your feedback and your impact on it. And community involvement and engagement, which is those that are most impacted by the decision-making process should be a part of the decision-making process, right? I mean, there's no one in here that doubts that. So the context for me is super important. It's philanthropy that brought us together. No knock on the business sector, no knock on local government, but it was philanthropy that put this conversation together and framed the conversation for the Pat Brown Institute, for us, for the Beacon Group to put together the data. So to me, the implication here, if we're going to think strategically, regionally, given the values that have been shared here by our colleagues, then we need to think through policy and through policy lenses. Housing, whether it be accessible, affordable, does not occur in a vacuum, right? There's development issues here. There's zoning issues. So when we talk about density, density doesn't occur in a vacuum, folks. The single family framing, multi-family framing, we need ordinances, laws, right? Legislation to reflect the will and to affirm the opportunity, right? The opportunities that we're talking here through the data are only conversations if they're left at a discussion around values, assets, opportunities. It's great, sounds beautiful, Academically, we could go on the whole semester talking about this, Rafe, but unless we attach those to local policies, regional policies, whether they be county, whether they be NHP, then it's an abstract, really, conversation. So my recommendation to our group here, but to all the stakeholders, is that if we're going to talk about what we want to achieve collectively through whatever approach we want to use, then we need two things to follow that vision, right, for thriving, prosperous, healthy, vibrant communities. The second is, what strategies are we going to use to achieve what we say we want to achieve? And again, there are processes that reflect decisions being made on behalf of folks. There are processes that reflect those folks that are impacted should be a part of the decision-making process. And that can happen very easily through policies. Santa Ana has a sunshine ordinance that requires, by policy, for transparency to occur on development projects, for community input to occur when you're going to invite Walmart into the community, right? That's a policy. Community benefits agreements are policies. If Walmart's going to come in, they have to invest in the community by policy. So if we're going to encourage resources, investment, we can put conditions on how those investments take place. If it's expanding the Alameda corridor, if it's working in the port. Jessica, I'm looking at you with the work on the west side in Long Beach. That happens through policies. We can require investors to do mixed-use housing if that's something we want. But it's not that one day a bank or an investor wakes up and says, you know what, I want to do more affordable housing in the community. That's not the way it happens, right? It's through a policy, and the city and elected officials have a say in that. It's through participatory budgeting by policy. If it could be at the local level, it could be at the county level. We have Lina Gonzalez, we have other elected officials, Rex Richardson, that have incorporated a participatory budgeting process on their funds in their district, right? That's a policy that we're talking about here. So again, my encouragement is here, that's the second step. What strategies are we gonna use? The third, and I think that's where the data is that we need baselines, right? So this trend thing is great, but only if we're looking at it through a trajectory lens. How will we know, that's the third question, that we've achieved this dream or this vision that we set out to achieve? So you need metrics for that. You need assessment, you need evaluation. Again, my encouragement here is those that are most impacted by these decision making should also be a part of the development of how are we going to measure success, right? If this is what the snapshot is of Southeast LA, how do we know what we want this data to look like in 5 or 10 years? So again, it's a recommendation for us to think through those kind of three lenses if indeed we are going to talk about assets and opportunities in the region. Thank you.
Thank you. To me, what I'm hearing from everybody is something that's actually buried in Chris's report, but not really explicit, which is that you can choose your future in the Southeast. While he might have said, for example, it's good to go toward multifamily housing and transit dependent, which is the kind of a common thing that's discussed now. There's also moving people from who are renting single-family homes into becoming homeowners. That's another model as well. There's the manufacturing model and the high-tech model that came up. What I'm kind of curious about is have you given some thought to the choices that could be made by these communities, that the future isn't just one choice, you either go forward or not, and you only go in this one direction? Because one of the things we learn about getting the attention of government officials is them seeing communities make choices about their future. Let me just start with Victor. What do you think about this notion about some of these alternative futures that the region could have, choices to be made?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think when we talk about choices, I think of how we serve our community, and I think sometimes when we think about community residents being served, we think about them being served by their elected officials. I don't necessarily see it that way. When I see, because I come from the not-for-profit sector and really as a nonprofit, and how we as an organization serve community residents to be able to meet relevant community needs, that's going to have impact. And I think for us in the Southeast, which going back to the data, and I may not be answering this question, but I think that's okay because you said we could just be ourselves.
Sure, absolutely.
Is I think one thing that lacked was data around nonprofits and the lack of there. And sometimes as communities, we underestimate the power of nonprofits. The healthier, if nonprofits have the infrastructure and the capacity to be able to deliver relevant services, it will be healthier communities. It's just period. It's simple than that. Because by doing that, not only do we build the education, the health, but the community and civic engagement of community residents, I think that solves a lot of the growing concerns that we see every single day in the Southeast region. And so a little commercial, for many of the nonprofits that are in this room, we're going to reach out to you, and we want you to engage with us. We began a collaborative, which is called the Southeast Los Angeles Collaborative. It's called CELA Collaborative. And tomorrow we're going to have a retreat, and we're going to identify the assets that are in our communities. We're not going to focus on the liabilities. We're going to focus on the assets. And so if you're interested or willing to be engaged in how together as a collective force, we, as a Southeast Los Angeles not-for-profit community, how we can better serve our neighborhoods, please reach out to anyone on this panel, or can other committee members raise your hand that are in the crowd? The Southeast Los Angeles Collaborative members. Please raise your hand. Leticia, Roberto, Raquel, please raise your hand. Because sometimes we have discussions on what do we have access to? What is affordability? And I think for us, we need to understand what that is. And we need to understand our assets of not-for-profits. So please, I encourage you to have communication with us, because not only the work that CCF is doing, we also have another foundation, the Weingart Foundation, that has made a commitment to our communities. And this is the time, folks, if we don't come together now, if we don't come together now, we're going to miss a huge opportunity in moving our communities forward.
Now, I want to say that was a better answer than my question. So I wish I had asked a question that would have led to that answer, is all I can say. So, Nadia, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
Suppose you took the ideas you have about education and you were talking to a national foundation, one of the big New York ones that don't know anything about California, and you wanted to get them interested in what we're talking about here. And they said, well, I know Boyle Heights, I know all the other areas, I know East LA, I know South LA, that I'm familiar with. Why should I undertake something, this area that I'm not familiar with? What can you tell me that would draw me in about both potential and need, that would really grab them? I think it's there. I think it's time to start thinking about that. What would be your pitch?
Well, I would first invite them into this room, because I'd like to actually get a show of hands of how many folks are from the Southeast here. How many folks here, for the most part, have a college degree, right? Okay, so you are the success stories, right? And so this is not, I think, this is not a matter of our kids don't have grit, our kids don't have, this is about access and opportunity. We see and we know that when given the access and resources, our people succeed. And so this is a matter of being able to demonstrate and visualize all of that and bring that picture to national foundations and say, we need more of this.
Mm-hmm. I think that's actually a very good pitch, actually. And I think it's the beginning of a really important argument, which is the question of the promise zones and things like that, is trying to get into that framework with organizations that are just used to going where they're familiar. Annabelle, do you have any thoughts about that, about how you would make the case to those who really need to know why I'm so important?
As I was listening to Nadia, I was thinking what I will say. I think that one of the things that I will particularly take as our personal stories. There are great examples of success. And as well, we know that there is interest at the end of the day, is also interest. I think that reports like the one that it was just presented, I think a combination of really what is important and what matters, which is the people that we live in these cities, the potential that we have as an individuals, and as well all the great things that are in our communities, as we just learned through the report and as we has been witness all the great assets that we have. And as someone mentioned, California is a paradise, and I think that here in Saudi Los Angeles cities, we live in a paradise. So we need to share that. We need to present that. But for me, what is most important is to present the assets, the human capital, who we are, what do we represent, and the potential that we have. I think that we have business entrepreneurs. The immigrant community is a great asset. We are very into putting our best to do great things for our communities, for our families. And now with our kids, all the potential that we have a young population that really can transform the places where we live. And I think that is in their interest to really help us and to really come and join us and support our efforts.
Great. The 710 freeway, it's really something. I heard you say it's an asset. Now, I know that you're very concerned about the impact of the traffic there on the terrible pollution problems of the area. In affluent areas, they treat freeways as the devil and will do anything they can to keep a freeway from going through the area. Chris was up here saying the 710 is an asset because it's a way to attract working people and businesses, et cetera, and you spoke of it as an asset. Is the 710 freeway a good thing or the work of the devil?
There might be more than one devil at work in this one, but wow. I mean, I think the reality is that it's a lot easier for a community that doesn't have a freeway to say no freeway than for a community that has a freeway to say no freeway. Right? Mm-hmm. There's a reality at play. And so I think when we look at the issue that is the 710 freeway, because it's an issue, is it an asset to economy? Certain economies, yeah. Right? As is a really cheap workforce, which is our communities, right? An underpaid and underprotected and so on and so forth workforce, right? So I think when we look at the issue, we always look at the opportunity. And so not shying away from the issues in our communities, some of the worst environmental and health issues in the world exist in our communities. Right? Some of the worst educational problems exist in our communities. Some of the worst, et cetera, problems exist in our communities. And I think when we actually look at the problems, right? When we do outreach, we say sometimes you have to be a little bit sinvergüenza, you know? Because if you're ashamed of those problems, then you won't look at them. And if you don't look at them, then you don't do anything about them. If you don't do anything about them, nothing happens, right? So we look at the problems and we understand, again, going back to kind of the electrification of goods movement in particular, if we start to develop solutions for these problems, that's the opportunity, right? If we build that asset, that's the opportunity moving forward. And so we don't fantasize about, our communities turning into forests or something like that, right? We understand what we have in front of us, and we try to transform that. And in investing in young folks, they can take what we give them and transform that further.
The speaker talked a lot about the LA River. So before Chris came up here, did that resonate with any of you that the LA River has an important, I mean, I don't want to play the drinking game that he was talking about, but that was pretty interesting. He talks about it all the time. He talks about it everywhere he goes. Victor, does the river ring a bell with you? And Juan, does the river ring a bell with you as important to this conversation in any way?
Yes, for all the reasons Mark just mentioned. I want to answer Nadia's question, Rafe, the policy implications of education. Look, this dashboard is great. Hooray. But what it tells you is what you're not doing, and it's a policy behind that. There's two real ways to get into a CSU. SAT score, A through G. Those are policies, right? Every single indicator on SAT shows that SAT is not a predictor for college success. Yet, we have it as an admissions requirement for our university. So again, we can try to get in there through that policy or really question whether that policy has implications where 75% are below college readiness. All right, so that's a quick answer. The river, Rafe, and then I'll defer to Victor. We have stakeholder meetings with community members every month, basically for the last 4 years. Thank you, Efrain, for the money for that. 5 issues have come out in 5 years, consistently, over and over again, and they're based on the data, right? Educational issues, health issues, economic issues. An interesting one that comes up, and I think I'm trying to figure out how do we frame this within a Latino policy agenda lens, because it's different in non-Latino communities. Youth development, so the work that the YMCA and everybody else up here is doing around youth, that comes up consistently. And then civic participation or lack thereof, not just voting, Ana Bella, comes up consistently as well. So when we speak with folks around, well, you know, what do we mean by educational issues? What is that? What are the health issues? Some way, somehow, they always link back to the river, right? So when we talk about, you know, green space, when we talk about jobs, when we talk about education, there is always whether it's indirect or direct, a link back to, you know, crime and safety along the river, you know, walkability, you know, the environment. So, and we have the community members here, and one of the questions that's always asked is, same question that's asked of Metro a lot. Why don't folks come down here and ask us what we want to do in the river? Right? So it's great for the speaker to come, but that needs to translate into some resources. Folks a little upstream, you know, seem to have a handle on how to make their wishes around the river come true. Midstream, not so much. And then down in Long Beach, because of the port, folks have a little bit more interest there in making some things happen along the river. But again, the mitigation there, and I heard that word a couple times, is through the process which I described earlier, right? Who are most impacted, and are they going to be explicitly involved in the decision making? So it behooves us to take the speaker's comments to heart, right? 51 miles, but not all 51 miles are treated the same way, right? And not the same amount of resources are allocated along those 51 miles. So just want to reiterate, that's what we hear from community members on a consistent basis as well.
But just a quick, and also in addition to answer that question, just a quick show of hands. Whether you're a foundation or corporation or just a philanthropist that has or is committed in supporting the Southeast, can you just raise your hand? Okay, all you nonprofits, you see this, right?
Take the picture.
So
your
I
cameras
do
out.
it not to put them on the spot, or for all of us to go and to request funding for them.
Victor needs money for lunch for the retreat tomorrow since he just invited everyone.
No. That has been taken care of by the Weingart Foundation and Belen Vargas, so thank you so very much for your generous support. But I asked that to be able to answer the question, because to want to remark it, it's great, 51 square miles, right? And there's certain communities that can advocate or have certain resources, or I'll just say certain capacities, to be able to identify those resources, to be able to funnel into their neighborhoods or their communities. The challenges that we face is the lack of capacity and infrastructure to advocate with one voice for us to design our own plan. And so to those funders that raised your hand, again, that have or are willing to invest in the community, that's a huge opportunity for us. And so I think, again, today's that start in the conversation and how we can move this particular agenda forward.
Mark wanted to comment on. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
go
we're
ahead.
all just jumping in.
Go
Sorry.
for it.
Go ahead. Everyone wants to jump in on the river.
I
Good.
wanted.
Metaphorically.
I wanted to jump on Victor's point and just echo it further. And I really just appreciate you bringing this home twice. And so I'm going to add a third, because it is about policy and it is about organizing. And where that is done well is when there is good nonprofit infrastructure, because who else does it? And so when you have a lack of nonprofit infrastructure, then you have a situation where everyone knows what needs to happen, but who has the resources to create that one voice, or where's the group? And so I think that, again, I just want to thank you, Victor, for continuing to not only bring that up here, but you've just been a consistent champion for this in a lot of offline conversations as well. And so I just want to recognize that, because that is so sorely needed, and we just we want to underscore that.
And Mark, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, if I can jump in on the river. I think the Lower LA River work group that exists right now is one of the only places where there's a regional conversation. And I think that's one of the things that lacks a lot in our communities, is a regional conversation. We're divided into so many different jurisdictions that for a long time have seen each other as competition. That it's really about regional conversations. That's where we have the opportunities with the 710 Freeway and the I-710 project. It's where we have the opportunity with the Lower LA River. But I think it's also about understanding that the LA River conversation isn't just about the water. And it isn't just about turning brownfields, right, underutilized and contaminated areas for 20 miles, turning that into green space. It's also about resident retention zoning and planning, which are policies, right? That's what's going to ensure that our communities get to enjoy the fruits of their labor, right? Because our communities have fought for this attention. And it's really regional conversations that are going to help do that. In the Lower LA River work group, when I look around the room, there's very few people who are engaging folks in the Lower LA River. When I look around the room, it looks like the majority of folks have kind of washed down the LA River from up north. And so when I look around here, I see a lot of folks who should be involved in that conversation, who aren't traditionally river advocates or traditionally environmental health advocates, but folks who play an important role. We have high schools on the river. What type of programs can we have to engage our young folks with the river that will lead to other trajectories in our communities, right? The opportunities are there, but it really is, as Victor mentioned, right, these kind of cross conversations, right? Stop having them in silos. Let's get together and talk, and that is the opportunity with the Southeast LA the collaborative. I think I can point to Exide just really quickly as an example where through community advocacy, building community power, we've been able to lead the conversation on what happens, which has led to the closure of Exide, but also state funds to clean up Exide, right? That has also led to a workforce development program, and I'll give a shout out to Oscar Magaña here. I'll give him a shout out every chance I can on this, because he was the first person in a public meeting to say, we see jobs coming. We need to make sure that our community members get these jobs. And that's what's happened now. DTSC, the Department of Toxic Substances Control, is piloting a workforce development program that they're looking at doing that across the state, right? Again, the issues we have in our communities can be the solutions that the rest of the country takes on.
I just wanted to share, we participated as part of one collaborative with Sierra Club and with other groups that traditionally do not engage with the Latino, with the immigrant communities. And it was really successful, the fact that even the San Gabriel Mountains were declared as a national monument by the President Obama a couple of years ago. And my feeling is that topics like the LA River, and those are really issues that can help us to bring us together all, because at the end of the day, we all want the same for our communities. And the issue here is that we need to see how we can create more internal capacity so we can see more grassroots organizations participating in those kinds of coalitions, because what Mark said, sometimes we participate or we sit on those places, but really the community that is impacted is not present. So we need to really make sure that those important voices are there, that are present, and that when decisions are taking place, that we can have the voice and we can advocate for ourselves. But I can say that environmental issues is something that really unified us. It's something that I have been observed how unified us, people from different races, from different backgrounds, because at the end of the day, we are sharing the spaces, we are sharing this planet, we are sharing the same resources, and we want the best for all of us.
In the spirit of this wonderful panel, I'd like to leave a few minutes now for people to either ask questions or comments. Same format. I probably won't call on people who asked questions on the first round, so I'd like to get some more folks in. We have about 15 minutes for questions, then it's lunchtime. So if you have questions or comments, please don't say I'd like to ask all 5 panelists to do something. It'll take too long. maybe they'll answer, maybe they won't, but most of you want to hear from you. So, Sasha, wait, did you already ask one in the first round? Yeah. Okay, then let's go for you. And tell us your name, please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kaylee. I'm born and raised in Linwood. Like, I'm like wary of like the word development and people wanting to come in and develop Southeast LA because I'm like, Southeast LA is super unique. Like, why would you want to take that away? You know, instead like revitalizing it from the inside out. So how, when development starts happening, because it seems inevitable at this point, like gentrification is happening everywhere, and it just seems inevitable that it's gonna travel southeast. So for community members and for people who haven't been privileged enough to learn what gentrification is, like, how do you suggest we start building that, like, I guess, resistance to it from like the level of the community versus the developer, I guess. You know what I mean?
I think we have to recognize the gentrification that has happened and is happening in Long Beach. So it's not just coming southeast, but it's also traveling north, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of getting sandwiched by it. I think just to kind of give a little bit on how gentrification tends to work, there's public investment that happens and then private investment that happens around it. And that's how you get displacement. That's how you, and then other outcomes are over-policing. There's a lot of homeless folks along the river. We need resources for that, right? So for me and a lot of work that East Yard has done, it's about involving ourselves in those public funding processes to ensure that we have protections before that even comes in, right? And so I think the lower LA River is really going to be the largest contributor, because hipsters don't want to live by a freeway necessarily, right? They're not like, oh, truck corridor, like electrified. That's so cool, right? That's not what they're looking for. But if there's more access points to the river and the river becomes cleaner and it becomes more like park space, that is something that's going to happen, right? And so I mentioned this idea of resident retention zoning policies and resident retention planning as things that need to happen, but this needs to happen in every single city, right? Linwood needs to approve policies, so there needs to be movement in Linwood to move that forward. Maywood needs these policies, so there needs to be movement in Maywood to move that forward, right? If anyone else in the room knows more than me on this, I would love to hear how we could do that all at once as opposed to city by city. But part of that could be finding out legislative ways of restricting or requiring cities to follow certain policies if they accept river revitalization funds. That could be a way. It's an emerging conversation that we're still trying to figure out ourselves. We definitely need more people to be part of that conversation.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Markovich, councilman for the city of Cudahy, and you guys just pretty much hijacked my question. My problem is that city of Cudahy hasn't had true meaningful economic development in over a generation, and I would hate for my tenure on council to be responsible for ushering in era of gentrification and literally change the landscape of Cudahy from being what is uniquely Cudahy. So my question is, how can I help prevent the sort of gentrification that'll open up, you know, a $12 sopa shop on the corner and really try to foster mom and pop shops and keeping the identity of the city, at the same time promoting policy that'll help combat this sort of trend that's going on through LA. Thank you.
Anybody want to come on?
Chris, Christian, thank you for the question. You know, Jorge's here, Karina's here. We have electeds here actually governing these areas. So I think two things, short term, and it goes back to your question, Mark, does anyone know? Well, there's two things that need to happen. I don't know if they're the solution, but they're certainly necessary. Insufficient, but necessary. One is mayors in the region talk to each other very infrequently and informally. I think you all have like 1 or 2 check-ins a year, informal conversations. So I think those conversations need to be strategic and formal. So I know that you all converse, but again, there's a difference between doing it offline versus doing it in a formal, strategic way. That's one. if again, we're going to get at it through a kind of a holistic regional approach. I think the second thing is, one of the reasons that you all don't talk to each other strategically and formally is you're at a, sorry to use this, deficit and disadvantage because you're part-time, right? City council folks are part-time city council folks. Mayors, many of you are part-time mayors. You have day jobs, right? You're trying to make a living. You're also impacted by the very same issues in different ways sometimes that other community members. So what happens is that then there's an overcompensation of the roles that city managers play, that zoning and planning commissions play, that chambers of commerce play, and they many times act as de facto default policymakers, right? So I think this is one way that nonprofits, other stakeholder groups can also do two things: support their elected officials, recognizing that we have technocrats and bureaucrats and other educated folks making decisions a lot of times. Mayors, city council folks get reports and recommendations, and then they vote on them. But we need to support our electeds and in some ways also educate our electeds around, I'm going to use this term again, the opportunities that exist through multi-stakeholder coalitions, right? Because you at the end of the day are voting on things and you're relying on certain folks to bring you the best recommendations to then make a decision. But you're there part-time. You have day jobs, right? So there is an over-reliance on our systematic deficiencies.
Thank you so much for the opportunity today to be here. And it's very interesting. I'm the executive director of Centro Chao, which is a nonprofit organization in Long Beach. And I appreciate all the dialogue that's happening. But even more than being a director of a nonprofit, I'm a resident of Long Beach, and I've been living there for over 50 years, particularly in the West Side area where my parents still live and where my kids all grew up and were born. You know, the conversation here today is, I know we're talking about the 710, and I'm very happy that the Southeast leaders and organizations are here today and really energized. But I would like to advocate that, you know, part of the discussion also include Long Beach, because as we talk about the 710, the 710 begins in Long Beach. And when we talk about the river, Long Beach gets all the debris of the river. And so particularly in the west side of Long Beach, that's one of the most impacted areas in the entire Long Beach where the 710 and the river runs through. So just to be inclusive, you know, think about the area. I know Juan, you know, is a big champion and leader in Long Beach, but, you know, he mentioned we have Lena Gonzalez and our mayor, and really having a regional conversation about that. And I particularly love, Juan, the sunshine policy. I think that's something that needs to shine over Long Beach, and definitely would love to work on something like that. But really, you know, want to be inclusive. I love everybody's energy from the Southeast. Victor, I know you're a leader and a champion. Victor actually came out of Long Beach, folks. So, so just wanted to comment, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ooh, if I could just add to that, I think again it's the regional conversations, and Southeast LA is like a sub-region, but it is really, when you're looking at the 710 as a facility and the river as facilities, those conversations extend higher. And I would say they even have to include Boyle Heights to a certain extent, right? I mean, when you look at the upper LA River, Boyle Heights is very different from the rest of the upper LA River communities, right? And just to give a quick example, there's the Skig Rail Yard on the west side, right? And part of what has stopped the Skig Rail Yard is the fact that the maintenance of those trains was going to happen in the City of Commerce with no mitigation, right? That's how we want a CEQA lawsuit, right? So it is those regional conversations that can help protect us.
I always have a soft spot in my heart for the people in the seats way back there. Does anybody have a question way back there? We do. Okay, Louis, make sure.
That's like the farthest seat, too, yeah.
What's that?
It's the farthest seat in the room.
It is the farthest seat. That is actually the farthest seat in the farthest section of the room. Let's hear it for him.
Good job.
Jose Luis Padilla, General Manager of Azteca America. Juan, I could not agree with you more. Policies. Who makes the policies? Elected officials. The problem with us as a community, nobody's afraid of us. They don't look at our vote as potentially dangerous to them to get reelected or not elected. So we can talk about all the features that affect our communities, but until we decide that we elect our own representatives, nothing's going to change. So the data's great. I've been through this for 25 years of data, and it comes back to the same thing. If we don't decide to elect our own officials and take control of the system, we will be here 10 years again. Because we're going through an election process today that, again, we are the scapegoat of everybody. And Juan, people make policy. If our mayors are part-time, let's draft a petition to make them full-time, pay them the right salary. If our legislators are part-time, because that's the only way we're going to change this. Because with the data, it doesn't mean anything. What do we do with the data? We go home, we talk about it, we chat, but we don't take action. Until we decide to elect the right officials and give them what is necessary to represent us the right way, nothing's going to change. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that just real quick, I think that goes to something that hasn't really been mentioned, and it's political corruption in the Southeast, right? I mean, I think everybody knows that. We have a long history. That wasn't part of the study either, right? But it's something that needs to be part of the conversation. A lot of leaders we have right now have come through fighting political corruption too, right? So that's definitely a place to look at.
I'd like to ask Nadia and Annabella have a couple of last thoughts because some of the questions went to the other panelists. Any closing thoughts you have before we are going to break for?
No, I just
Yeah.
want.
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
sorry. Go ahead. Well, I just wanted to say that as we are preparing for these elections on November 8th, the importance of all the residents, the importance all residents of this area, but as well making sure that all people in our community that has the opportunity to vote, that they can vote in the elections, and as well for those that are unable to do so, that motivate families and relatives to participate. And as just one person mentioned, the fact that we are going to be respected is going to be only when they see the power that we have as a community, and that's when we can come as a group and say that we count, and we will count until our communities vote. So my final thought is on the importance of really making the space and making the space to participate on the upcoming elections, but more than that, motivating all our, in our families, relatives, and all people that is close to us to participate on the elections.
And Nadia?
I want to go back to the just some last thoughts on the policymakers and our elected officials for a second. And I completely agree. You've got to elect and organize to elect folks that are really representative of your vision and what you want to see. But there's a second piece to that, is what happens after folks are elected. And what interests are served after the election. And so, and the accountability piece, right? And I think that really only happens when you have good organization, very clear vision of what you want and what that looks like in a tangible way, so that you can hold people accountable and be able to say, you know what, you didn't do us right here. And so we're going to, in a very real way, organize to have somebody that will, and give somebody else an opportunity, because I think that the accountability piece is the absolute second half of that, getting somebody who you believe in. But if they can't be effective, I think we've got to be really honest about that.
Thank you. Now, before I thank our wonderful panel, which I'll do momentarily for I really think very informative comments and discussion, I'm going to introduce Raquel Beltran, who's the Associate Director of the Pat Brown Institute. And a small shout out for her. I think in addition to all of our partners, I think her role in organizing this event was absolutely superlative, and it shows in almost everything that occurred. So I just wanted to thank you, Raquel, for everything you did. It's really remarkable. And I have two quick things. The reason I'm holding things up is she's going to explain what happens next. So just do whatever she says. It usually works out well for us, so I think it'll work out well for you, too.
She can explain how we're revamping the agenda.
Technically speaking, we're not revamping the agenda. We are reconceptualizing the agenda. There's an important distinction here, which I think you need to know. I'd also like to clarify that, as often happens in my years as a professor, people get inspired by things I never actually said. This morning, Chris said that he was deeply moved by my saying we have too much democracy, which is not what I said. What I said is we have too many elections and not enough democracy. I think we vote on a lot of things, but we don't spend enough time figuring out how to get organized. I am willing, however, to inspire him, but I would like it if it was based on something I actually said and believe. But you can't have everything in life. Sometimes you have to choose between those two. So before we turn it over to Raquel, I want to thank this wonderful panel for just great comments and for all the work that you do. So let me introduce Raquel now. Raquel.